Mr. President, I come to the floor today in opposition to the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. I'm truly disappointed that my Republican colleagues have chosen to ram through this partisan nominee in the middle of a pandemic when an election is underway and tens of millions of Americans have already cast their ballots. The Senate should be focused on a bipartisan COVID-19 relief package to help Granite Staters and Americans across this country who are struggling to pay the bills and put food on the table during this pandemic. Instead, Leader McConnell's only priority has been to push through a nominee who will fundamentally alter the balance of the court and affect the lives of generations of Americans, all just days before ballots will be counted to decide the next president of the United States and the makeup of this very body. And the stakes in this nomination could not be higher. I want to read an excerpt from an email I received from a constituent. This is from Dave in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Dave writes, "What is at stake with this Supreme Court nomination? Among the topics that have stricken the deepest sadness, pain, and fear in eyes, minds, and hearts are the goals of this administration to dismantle the Affordable Care Act, a woman's right," and he says in quotes, "and only her right to make decisions about her body and her life, and the rights of the LGBTQ community." Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to include the full text of this email in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. The President and his allies here on Capitol Hill are trying to tear down the health care law that has helped provide millions of Americans with coverage in the middle of the greatest public health crisis in a century. And they've pressed forward with this reckless attempt, even though they don't have a plan for what to do when as many as 23 million Americans, in New Hampshire more than 100,000 Granite Staters, would lose their health care coverage. So I want to repeat that. This administration and congressional Republicans have no plan for what to do if millions of Americans were to lose their health care coverage if the Affordable Care Act is overturned. And we've seen for the last 6 years, congressional Republicans have tried to repeal the ACA numerous times, and they have failed every time because the American people raised their voices and made it clear that they want to keep the Affordable Care Act and strengthen it, not repeal it. Well, now we're seeing the administration and congressional Republicans try to do what in the courts they were not able to get done in Congress, to overturn the Affordable Care Act. And we've seen Judge Barrett, she's made her feelings very clear about the ACA. She disagreed with decisions to uphold the ACA the last 2 times it came before the Supreme Court, and she wouldn't answer questions about the health care law during her confirmation hearing. Striking down the ACA would deal a crushing blow to our most vulnerable populations during this pandemic. If the court strikes down the Affordable Care Act in its entirety, Granite Staters and Americans across the country will lose access to Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion is a critical source of coverage for millions of Americans, and in New Hampshire, for thousands of Granite Staters who have lost their jobs during this pandemic. And in fact, what we've seen is that enrollment in Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire enrollees since the start of this pandemic, as we've seen job losses mount. For these individuals and all of the more than 60,000 Granite Staters who are covered through Medicaid expansion, the loss of the ACA in the Supreme Court overturning the ACA, would eliminate a critical lifeline for coverage during this public health crisis. And in New Hampshire, if we lose Medicaid expansion, we also lose our most important tool for combating the opioid epidemic. Without the ACA, we'll go back to a time when insurance companies have sweeping power to undercut coverage. They'll be allowed to charge women higher premiums than men for the same coverage. The health insurers would be able to remove essential health benefits like prescription drugs or maternity care. They would be allowed to jack up premiums or deny coverage altogether for individuals with pre-existing conditions. More than 8 million Americans, including nearly 10,000 Granite Staters, could be denied coverage because they've previously contracted COVID-19, which could now count as a pre-existing condition. And without the ACA, seniors could once again find themselves stuck in Medicare's donut hole for prescription drug coverage at a time when we're seeing drug prices soar. And in her confirmation hearing, Judge Barrett even refused to say whether the Medicare program is constitutional. With Judge Barrett on the Supreme Court, the health coverage that the ACA, Medicare, and other federal programs provide will be under a constant threat. And sadly, women's reproductive rights are also on the line with Judge Barrett's nomination. When he ran for president in 2016, Donald Trump said that he would appoint judges who would overturn Roe v. Wade. Well, we're seeing that very clearly with Judge Barrett's record. It shows that President Trump is trying to do just that, overturn Roe v. Wade. And Amy Coney Barrett's dissenting opinions while serving on the Seventh Circuit have shown that she is comfortable with laws that make it difficult or nearly impossible for a woman to exercise her right to make her own reproductive health decisions. Judge Barrett has even publicly supported an organization that's opposed to in vitro fertilization, a procedure that has helped millions of American couples start a family. Almost 50 years of precedent upholding a woman's right to control her own body are in jeopardy because Republicans are playing politics with the Supreme Court and packing the court with extreme justices. There are nearly 20 abortion-related cases that are currently one step away from reaching the Supreme Court. A partisan court would likely disregard long-standing precedent in these cases and put women's health and well-being at risk. And let's be very clear. Repealing Roe v. Wade is not going to reduce the number of abortions. If history is any indication, what it does is increase the number of abortions in the country. Unfortunately, the Affordable Care Act and women's reproductive rights are just two of the many areas of American life that a partisan Supreme Court could dramatically alter. Equality for LGBTQ Americans is another major concern. Millions of gay and lesbian Americans have been married since the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. But in a recent dissent penned by Justices Thomas and Alito, these justices challenged the constitutionality of that decision and called for it to be revisited. And when asked in her confirmation hearing about the precedent of the Supreme Court decision to legalize same-sex marriage, Judge Barrett was evasive. So you can understand the anxiety and fear that same-sex families are experiencing as they watch the Republican-led Senate rush this nomination. The stakes are also incredibly high for voting rights, for worker protections, for common-sense gun laws, for so many other issues that are in jeopardy with the appointment of Judge Barrett. Now, I know the die has been cast. We saw that yesterday with the 51-48 cloture vote. But I believe this effort to politicize the Supreme Court is a decision that those who care about our democratic institutions will come to regret for many decades to come. And if today's vote is the same as yesterday's, 51-48, this will be the closest vote for a Supreme Court justice in our nation's entire history. We should not be doing this today. We should be focusing on what the American public is most concerned about: help with the coronavirus. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.